So now that we know what tests are, let's actually try to write out a test of our own. So here what I'm going to be using is the code that I have been using in the part about collections and data structures, because here we have a very nice class called recipe app that I can just use and try to test out some things via unit testing. This is a separate class. It doesn't really make use of any other class. There are no dependencies on it. There are no other services that I need in order for it to work. So let's just get straight to it. First thing that I'm going to need to do is set up my environment so that I can use test at all. Because right now I do not have a test catalog or anything of sorts that could let me write out tests. So in order to fix that, let me show you what you need to do in a freshly created project. So first of all, I'm going to right click on the collections. This is the name of the project itself. And then select new directory, which I'm going to call test. And right now it's just a directory. It's not marked anywhere. IntelliJ does not yet really recognize it as a directory for tests. So in order to change that, I will go ahead into the top left main menu, project structure, also Ctrl-Alt-Shift-S, and then I will select modules, select the test catalog that I have just created, and from this point out, what I need to do is mark it as tests. As I can see here, it has been marked as test source folders. I press apply, OK, and now you can see that this catalog has been marked as test catalog, and I actually do have only tests here. So this has been recognized as a test catalog. So every test that you will create from this point forward will be in this catalog and will be marked in green so that it's easy to discern between production code, which is in the source catalog, SRC, and the test that is in the test catalog. So let's just create a new Java class and call it recipe app test so that it's easy to discern what is happening. Okay, so that's it in terms of the preparation of the project structure, so my folders within the project. What I need to do right now is start creating the tests. So let's see what do I have to test here. I've got a hash map with recipes to which I have 5 methods. I've got add recipe, get ingredients of recipe, is recipe present, delete recipe, and update recipes ingredients. So first of all, what I will need to do in order to be able to test out recipe app, I need to create an object out of it that will be just for the sake of tests. Let's try and do it and create a private recipe app test object equals new recipe app. So yeah, now we've got preparation pretty much out of the way just for the initial setup. If I want to create a test method, what I need to do is, for example, public void. We are always going to be marking the test methods as void because we will not be really using the outcome of the methods for anything further down the line. It's just for the sake of tests. So I'm going to name it. Let's take a look. First, I want to test a happy path of the add recipe. So in order to test this out, I will need to then go ahead and create my tests. Let's try happy path add recipe, meaning that everything is working properly. We do not take any arguments, and this is the body of the method. What is left is I need to annotate this method as a test method. In order to do that, I just use add test annotation, and then I press Alt Enter to add JUnit to my class path. What exactly is JUnit? JUnit is the most widely used library by Java to create unit tests and integration tests. And this is the one that we will be using right now. I'll be using the 5.8.1, which is the newest one that will allow me to write tests. I press OK, and then I just import the class. What does JUnit allow me to do? First of all, as you can see, the method that I have annotated with the test annotation can be run. So this is the first instance ever when, other than main method, I can run some code. So this is very, very useful. And then again, in the JUnit library, I've got classes called, or rather methods called assertions, which are used to check whether some condition is true or false or equal, for example. Those assertions are used via the static object, rather static class of assertions, and then calling, for example, assert true, true. Of course, this is going to be resulting in a true statement, but let's run the code and see how it behaves. And yeah, as you can see, I get a report, test passed 1 of 1 test, and here I've got the information about which tests were run. So very, very useful. By the way, if in your IntelliJ you do not see the tests which are successful, then please make sure to mark this check mark to show past tests. Okay, so this is of course always going to be true, but then what I want to do within this test is to check out whether after I have added the recipe to my recipe app, whether it is returned. So let's see what do I need to do in order to add a recipe. I need a recipe object and an array list of ingredients. So let's say that I want to just use some dummy data, which is not something very complicated. So let's just create recipe. Recipe equals to new recipe, and let's call it test recipe. And then as for ingredients, what I want to add is going to be just an empty list, which still counts because it's an array list, right? It just doesn't have anything in it. So let's just create an array list of ingredients. And then into our test object, we are going to add recipe and its ingredient list. So let's then check. This is a Boolean method, meaning that after we put something in here, we should get true. So then let's also create a variable to store the outcome of this add recipe operation. So it's going to be Boolean test added. And then we're going to be putting it here because we are assuming that it will end up in a success. So this will be the thing that we want to achieve. So actually, right now we've got assertions assert true. So this is whether something is going to be successful here. But then again, let's also try to test out whether this has been actually added and that this test recipe is present within my recipe app. So now what I'm also going to do is go ahead with assertions that assert true, test object that is recipe present, test recipe. So both of those should return true because this recipe with this array list of ingredients should be added, and then it should be present within this particular case. So let's run the test and see whether it works. Yep, it works very nicely. Everything is passing. There are no outstanding issues that we need to fix. But this is what is called actually a happy path. So now that we get a happy path, let's try out a negative path, right? So what happens when something goes wrong? I think that the best thing to showcase when something goes wrong is to try and do something with the input. For example, if I were to test out is recipe present, and here I've got a recipe name, let's try to test out another thing. So add test, public void, let's try no recipe for is present. Try to write out the methods that you're creating in the most accurate way as to what we are going to be testing. And now what I'm going to assert is assertions that assert false, because every assertion also has its counterpart that is negative. So now with assert false, let's try to check whether test object that is recipe present not found. Let's try and run the test. And yeah, everything is passing. So it is a good negative example. So let's check what else do we need to test. We've got the get ingredients of a recipe for a specific recipe name. So what we will need to do in order to test out the happy path of it, we will need to actually add some recipes here with some ingredients to check whether they actually have been added and whether they equal what we expect. So right now I'm going to create another test, public void happy path search for ingredients. And what I'm going to put here is, first of all, let's copy and paste this code. Then test object that add recipe ingredients. And then what I want to check is also some ingredients have been added, so I don't want an empty list this time. I want a new list of ingredients. Let's say it's going to contain garlic. So now what we have is a recipe with a single ingredient within the list. So what I want to do right now is I want to assert whether assertion assert equals, so this time we are comparing two objects. I want to assert whether the recipe that I get and the list of ingredients is equal to what I have added here. So the expected value is going to be the ingredients list, but in order to check whether everything is working properly, let's use the test object that get ingredients of a recipe, and this recipe is called test recipe. So here what we are testing is whether actually we are getting the proper list of ingredients when we ask for this particular recipe. Let's try it. And yeah, once again, everything is passing, everything is working properly. But if it wouldn't be found, for example, I make a mistake here in the name of the recipe. If I run a test right now, I get information that the test has failed, right? So here I've got the expected value, so this one on the left, and what was actually there, this time an empty array because we didn't find anything. And then I've got information where did it actually fail. So very, very useful and a powerful tool to actually see what has went wrong. Let's change it so that it's again working properly. Also, I do not have to run all the tests individually. I can also run them in bulk, so all of them, by just using the play button next to the class statement. So if I do that, as you can see, all the tests are passing and they are really independent from each other. So that's also very nice. Let's also try with another type of test to try out another negative path. For example, let's check what happens if we try to find a recipe that is null. So let's try public void try finding null recipe. So in this case, what we want to do is try to find out whether test object that is recipe present null. Of course, we do not add anything here, so we are setting that it's going to be true, right? No recipe should be there if we try to test out for null. This is a probable outcome, or rather example, because of course, whenever we have any sort of user input, then something can go wrong. And null is actually one of the most common issues that we run into. So let's try it. Try finding null recipe, and here we see that there was an issue, right? Expected true, actual false. Oh yeah. But yeah, that's just the way it works, right? Right now, if it seems like there is no null. So here I just wrote a wrong test. But yeah, it seems like our code is handling nulls properly. So that's a good information for us. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Of course, there are quite a lot more tests that we can run. For example, get ingredients of a recipe, whether for a non-found recipe, whether it's found, whether it handles null properly, whether everything is really compiling no matter what we do. But as you can see, just for the happy paths, I already have written some code and one negative path or two. So as you can see, it can get really big, but of course we want to test out as much as possible within the scope of particular class. And once again, you can see that the structure of the test is given this is the given those initial inputs and the values. When we do a specific operation, then we expect something to happen. So this still applies. Also, very important thing, always try to write out the test in a way for them to be concise and they cannot be dependent on each other. So yeah, that's pretty much it. I'm hoping that you are finding the unit test useful for you. Test out all the code that you have written up until this point. Try to play around with assertions. There are quite a lot of them. What we've used here is just some basic assert true, assert false, assert equals. But then in the future, we're going to be also exploring assert throws to check whether everything is throwing a proper exception depending on the situation, which is also very, very important. But yeah, that is also, of course, going to come a little bit in the future when we are going to be talking a little bit more about exceptions and then about integration tests, which are way more complicated but are way more powerful. So thank you very much and see you in the next video where we are going to be talking about some integration tests, but test-driven development.